Gunnar Henderson was absolutely incredible in 2024. But is there somehow still another level to his game? We'll talk about that coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Wednesday, February 26th, 2025, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we are going to do the 2024 season review for Gunnar Henderson. He was, without a doubt, the best player on the 2024 Orioles. He was an all-star. He finished fourth in AL MVP voting. It was an incredible season for the Orioles' 23-year-old shortstop. So I'll talk about all the things that went right for Gunnar Henderson last year. We'll talk about a couple of things that could be improved on for this season, and then chat about his biggest storylines, including will he remain in the leadoff spot for the Orioles, and is there another level for him to step up to? But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast. Before we get there, though, just want to thank you for making Locked On Orioles your first listen of the day, and to thank all the everydayers out there. Of course, we are now into spring training and now back with the 5 podcasts per week schedule, which will run throughout the 2025 season. And we thank you for joining us every single time, wherever you listen, whether it be Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or others. You could subscribe there, leave a 5-star rating and a review. It really helps out the show. And if you watch here on YouTube, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel. If you have any thoughts, questions, comments about the show, want to send in some mailbag questions, whatever it may be, you can always email us at lockedonorioles@gmail.com. But let's jump into one of our final season review episodes of the offseason. As I've mentioned throughout the offseason, basically doing an episode for almost every player on the Orioles 40-man roster who was with them last year and will be with them again this year. And we're down to the 3 previous number 1 overall prospects in baseball, Gunnar, Adley, and Jackson. And today we're going to talk about Gunnar Henderson, run through his 2024 season, and look at what is on the horizon for 2025. And for Gunnar Henderson, we begin with what went right. And what went right is Gunnar was the best player on the Orioles. He finished 4th in American League MVP voting. And he was, I think, without a doubt, a top 10 player in Major League Baseball last season. That is a lot of things going right. His final stats, he played in 159 of the Orioles games. In 719 plate appearances, Gunnar hit .281 with a .364 on base and a .529 slugging percentage. Good for a 155 WRC plus. He hit 37 home runs, 92 RBIs, stole 21 bases, an 11% walk rate, and a 22% strikeout rate. And it all evened out to an 8.0 WAR, according to Fangraphs, for Henderson in 2024. He finished among American League position players who were qualified 4th in WAR, 7th in WRC plus, 8th in slugging, 8th in on-base percentage, 4th in hard hit rate, 6th in average exit velocity, 12th in walk rate. The list goes on and on. He was one of the best players in the American League. And you'll see that Gunnar didn't really lead baseball in many categories. He wasn't like a locked-in top 5. He was pretty much a locked-in top 10 in the American League in every category. But what allowed him to combine all of that and still be in the AL MVP race is that it was an amazing, sum of all parts season for Gunnar. He did nothing number 1 in baseball, but he had so many incredible to elite things that he did all across his game, both offense, defense, base running, all those things that we'll get to, that it just summated to, hey, an 8-win season. And if he didn't have to deal with Aaron Judge, Bobby Witt Jr., and Juan Soto all being in his league, that was enough to potentially be an MVP level season that Gunnar put out there in 2024. And the best thing was, it wasn't just that he was good across the board. He got better in everything across the board from his 2023 season. Now, some of that was because he started so slow in the first 2 months of 2023 and then really turned it on in the final 4 months. And of course, won AL Rookie of the Year that year and followed up with an MVP type campaign. But if you look at everything on the surface stats, everything under the hood, his hard hit rates, his bat speed, his chase rates, everything got better. And that includes the walk rate, which was fun. It jumped from 9 to about 11%. The strikeouts came down, which is always good as well for a guy like Henderson. But the walks were so cool because it gave this like signature Gunnar Henderson thing throughout the year. And there were many signatures, right? He hit 37 home runs. We'll talk about the leadoff homers. He's got his own celebrations at home plate. He's got his own celebrations when he gets a double or a triple and gets up from diving into a bag. But what Gunnar did after he would walk was basically like, I hate walking. And Gunnar did it a lot. You're a guy who plays every day. You got 11% walk rate. Like, he went up there and he drew 78 free passes in 159 games last year. And it looked like he was ticked off every single time he drew a walk. He'd take the bat, he would sling it in what looked like frustration with a lot of velocity over towards the Orioles dugout. It was quite a sight to see when Gunnar would walk, and it feels like one of the defining images of the Orioles season. Is just like, Gunnar is so good. He gets mad when he gets on base because he knows if he gets a pitch to hit, he'll probably end up further along than first base. That's how it felt like really the thought process was for Gunnar when he would draw a walk, but he still had the discipline to take those walks when he needed to. Now, in terms of the improvements he made, I would say the best thing Gunnar improved on this year is getting better against left-handed pitching. Now, this is something he was doing throughout the 2023 season. When he was really struggling in those first 2 months, he basically couldn't hit lefties at all. He got better and better throughout the year, late in the season against lefties. So it wasn't as surprising that he got better overall in 2024, but to see the full season stark differences was pretty incredible. In 2023, Gunnar Henderson got 167 plate appearances against lefties. And that's a fairly small-ish number for a guy that played 150 games that year. The Orioles, especially early in the season, when he was struggling, were kind of sitting him at times against lefties. Now, it's not like he got a crazy amount more this year. He got 217 plate appearances because you just don't see that many lefties. But he struggled in those 167 in 2023. He hit 209 with a 293 on base and a 324 slugging, with a 25% strikeout rate and a 75 WRC plus. He was 25% worse than league average as a hitter against left-handed pitching in 2023. You could say you would kind of, at times that season, would have rather had somebody else at the plate rather than Gunnar Henderson if a lefty was on the hill. And that seems unthinkable after watching what he did in 2024, because obviously he was better against righties. He destroys righties. I mean, against righties, good luck. A 162 WRC plus, hit 323 and slugged 813 against curveballs and sliders from righties. Like, if you're a right-hander, do not throw a breaking ball to Gunnar Henderson. He will demolish it. We know how he's going to hit righties. But he was also amazing against left-handers. He went from a 75 WRC plus to a 138 WRC plus over 217 plate appearances against lefties this past season. Hit 257, 359, 470. Now, the strikeout rate remained the same at 25%, so he still had some swing and miss in his game against left-handers, and that you generally see that with all even great left-handed hitters in Major League Baseball. But when he got good pitches to hit, this time he did damage, and that was really the big difference. And I think the main difference was against breaking balls. Last year, back to 2023, even if he got a hanging breaking ball from a lefty, he really still struggled to time it out. He hit just 197 with a 348 slugging and an 85 mile per hour average exit velocity against left-handed breaking balls. 2024, 268 average, 577 slug, 90 mile per hour average exit velocity against left-handed breaking balls. Yes, he still had some swing and miss and would chase some good ones out of the zone. But when a lefty hung a curveball or a slider to Gunnar, he didn't miss it this past season. And that was really the biggest difference. And it was also nice because he's a complete hitter who just didn't slump. I mean, you talk about a complete hitter. If you're watching here on the Locked On Orioles YouTube page, you're going to see Gunnar Henderson's spray chart from this season. This is via Baseball Savant and StatCast. This is his hit spray chart, so it doesn't include any outs. But look at the home runs. I mean, obviously, as you're going to see for most left-handed hitters, most of his home runs go to right field, but a good chunk to center, even a chunk to left. Look at all of his singles, how spread out they are throughout the outfield, how the doubles, he sent plenty of them to left center and down the left field line. Like, it was impressive to see Gunnar Henderson with his power use the entire field this season, and it just makes him so much more dangerous as a hitter. And honestly, We've seen Gunnar one time clear Baltimore as a left-handed hitter going the opposite way. It's almost impossible to do that. Now that they're moving the wall in a little bit in left field at Camden Yards for this season, Gunnar can use that oppo power even more at home. And that makes me think he could hit even more than the 37 home runs that he hit last year. And with he's got power to all fields. I mean, he slugged over 600 to left field, center field, and right field when you split the field into thirds last season. That is incredible to slug that high up the middle and to the opposite field. And it allows him to not slump, like even when the Orioles were in the doldrums of their worst offense in August and September. And yes, Gunnar also had his worst stretch in August, but his worst month of August was still a 105 WRC plus. When he was at his worst this season, he was still 5% better than a league average hitter. That's how talented he is and how basically slump proof he is, because he can hit lefties and righties so well. And his longest stretch without a hit this season was 4 games. It was August 6th through the 9th, 3 games in Toronto, 1 game in Tampa Bay. He went 0 That was the only time he went 4 consecutive games this season without a hit. How did he follow it up? He followed it up immediately with back-to-back 3-hit games in Tampa Bay right after that. So even if it looked like he was heading into a mini slump there in early August, flip that switch immediately, back-to-back 3-hit games. It's just how talented this guy is. And you add all that up, everything he does as a slugger, but he's not this big hulking first baseman who moves slowly around. The base paths are where he arguably dominates even more. He started to run more this season, went 21 for 25 in stolen bases after going just 10 for 13 in 2023, just running a lot more often because he can steal those bases. And that's with his sprint speed via StatCast basically being the same. It's, almost 90th percentile in baseball. And he is aggressive on the bases, not just in stealing bases, but when he's out there going first to third, first to home, taking the extra base, turning a single into a double. We have seen plenty of that from Gunnar, and the stats back it up. StatCast grades him as the 19th best overall base runner by their base running metric in MLB. But in terms of attempting to take the extra base, only 4 players in Major League Baseball last year had more attempts at taking an extra base than Gunnar Henderson. And that was Bobby Witt Jr., Jarren Duran, Ellie De La Cruz, and Corbin Carroll. Some of the other just absolutely elite speed and elite base runners in Major League Baseball. And Gunnar was right up there with them. And his aggressiveness doesn't really cost him. His success rate is very high, taking those extra bases. It's something that the Orioles have done well, that Brandon Hyde has said this spring training they want to be more aggressive and do more good things on the base paths this year. That starts with Gunnar because of not just how fast he is, but of how talented as a base runner he is. That is a skill too. That is a skill that is separate from your speed. And Gunnar has both, along with being a world-class hitter. That is just what makes him so good and so talented when he goes out there. But he's not the perfect player. Still finished 4th in AL MVP voting. You could argue there's some spaces where he can get better. We will talk about those coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Wonderful Pistachios. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Every 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. Now, personally, I'm a fan of the old school pistachios. I love cracking open a shell for that satisfying crunch. Maybe it's like the crab eater in me. I like to crack open a shell to eat something. But if you like the no shells variety, they've got so many great options, so many great flavors at Wonderful Pistachios as well. It's like snack meditation, although when you get that crack of the shell. So get snackin and get crackin with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. So we're talking Gunnar Henderson and his 2024 season, and as surprising as it may sound, it wasn't a perfect year for Gunnar Henderson. There were some things that maybe he could work on. We still have a category, like we do for all of these episodes, about what went wrong for Gunnar in 2024. And we start with his defense. And let me put it this way. His defense is not bad. He is a solid league average overall shortstop defender. And that plays out in the numbers. He was at a straight up 0 for StatCast outs above average, which at this point is the best way to kind of metrically grade defense in 2024. What is 0? That basically means a league average defensive shortstop is what Gunnar Henderson was. And when you are one of the top 10 bats in Major League Baseball, an elite hitter, if you pair that with league average defense at a premium position, you're going to be super valuable, even if you aren't a Gold Glove caliber player. And that's kind of what Gunnar has been. He was also a 0 outs above average in 2023. He was a -1 in 2022, but that's when he played those weird innings at second base that kind of screwed up that metric a little bit. So he's basically been a league average infield defender since he debuted at the end of the 2022 season. And that's fine. Like, he is not a bad defender. I don't think anyone would watch Gunnar Henderson or look at the numbers and say that is a bad defensive shortstop. But he's just not great. He's not elite. He's not Gold Glove level. And that's okay, but it is an area of his game where he can improve. If he wants to get to that next level, being like a 10 WAR player like Bobby Witt Jr. was this year, Bobby Witt was a Gold Glove level shortstop at times this season. That is somewhere Gunnar could get. And again, it's asking a lot from a player that's already this good to take another step forward, but it's a possibility when you're just a league average defender at shortstop. And he makes some amazing plays. He makes some super highlight reel plays. His arm strength is super good. It's like 85th plus percentile in baseball. The arm gets him out of a lot of jams. He shows it off at shortstop a lot. And it's still fun to watch him play shortstop defensively, but there are some plays from time to time that he should make that he doesn't. And that's okay throughout a 162 game season, but it means there is room to improve. And StatCast kind of breaks up all the different plays as a shortstop, going left, going right, coming in, going back, pop-ups, line drives, grounders, all that stuff, and breaks it up and tries to tell you, okay, Gunnar is at a 0. But that doesn't mean he's average at everything. It means he's probably better at one thing versus the other thing in terms of going right or going left. And it's really interesting to look at it because in terms of range, like, they have him pretty standard on his range at shortstop. Like, it's nothing crazy. The arm strength is really good. They have him being really, really good at moving to his right, going towards third base. He's not as good at moving left. He's really good at going back. But here's his one issue. The StatCast outs above average by basically move that you can make by placement of the ball, it's all around average. It's pretty elite moving towards the third base hole. That's where he makes his best plays, moving to that hole, picking up a ball in the backhand, using that big arm to fire to first base, actually being able to throw the ball and not having to jump for no reason like Derek Jeter. But he is at -6 on balls where he has to come in. And that is the part of the game that is a little concerning because he was at a +2 coming in on balls in 2023. That was not really where he struggled in his game. If you look at his shortstop game in 2022, he was actually struggling with those plays going towards third base. He worked on that. He became elite at that. But something in the footwork, he lost some on those slow dribblers to shortstop coming in on the balls. He has the arm strength to make up for it sometimes, but that seems to be where he struggles. So that is something I'm going to be watching very closely when this 2025 season opens, is those dribblers, those choppers to short. The balls where Gunnar has to come in on it at shortstop, that is where he had his troubles last year. And we shall see if he's worked on that this offseason, if he can improve that going into 2025. And I know I get the questions every once in a while, like, hey, if Gunnar's struggling a bit, shouldn't they move Jackson to short, put Gunnar at third, move Westberg to second, or whatever it may be? Like, no. I still think even between those three, Holiday, Westberg, Henderson is the best defensive shortstop of the three. And he seems to love sitting at that position. Some people also say, oh, why don't you move him back and forth between short and third like they did in 2023? I think it's better for a player to have a set position every single play and every single day. He is not a deficiency for the Orioles. Again, he's grading out as basically a league average shortstop with an elite bat. I am keeping him planted at shortstop defensively every single day this season. Now, in terms of offense, if you're trying to nitpick and maybe cut it into zones, what pitches does he struggle against? What zones of the plate does he struggle against? I would say it's maybe four-seam fastballs up in the zone. That's maybe the only place. If you split up pitches to, all different pitch types, Gunnar hit 239 against four-seam fastballs last year. That was his lowest batting average against any pitch type. That includes, sinkers and cutters, sliders and curveballs and changeups and all that good stuff. 239 against four-seam fastballs. That was the lowest batting average. And the biggest issues were up in the zone. So if you're watching on the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel, you will see the charts right here. And this is Gunnar Henderson in 2024. This is batting average by zone. And you can see up in the zone and then above the strike zone, he's basically 200 or below in the batting averages in all of those quadrants. That is where pitchers can go and get him, especially if they have good ride and good velocity on their four-seam fastball. That is the one way that pitchers are still able to get Gunnar Henderson out. And when he strikes out specifically, that is generally where it happens. Now, lefties can still get him with a good slider, and righties can still get him with a good changeup, fading down and away. But for lefties and righties, if they both have the same plan against Gunnar Henderson, it is high four-seam fastballs. New chart here, if you're watching on the Locked On Orioles YouTube page from StatCast and Baseball Savant, is these are all of Gunnar Henderson's strikeouts swinging against four-seam fastballs this season. And as you can see, none of them are below the middle part of the zone. Not many of them are on the inner third. Most of them are up and slightly away, and a good chunk of them are up and actually above the strike zone. So he goes chasing above the zone a little too much and gets himself into trouble with swings and misses on four-seam fastballs. So he can still drive the ball when he makes contact in those areas. He has a little bit of struggles making contact at times. What I would say for Henderson is, if there's one place to improve, you're going to swing and miss sometimes to go get those high fastballs. But it's laying off the high fastballs that are above the zone. That is the one piece of plate discipline that I think could take him to an even further level. It's okay if you swing and miss at fastballs that are up in the zone but are actually strikes or borderline strikes. But some of these strikeouts, they're well above the zone, coming up towards his chin that he's swinging and missing at. If he can lay off those pitches, it's just one less area for pitchers to attack a player that already covers so much of the plate. And that could potentially take him to the next level. And again, he's doing damage on some of those pitches, so he's still going to attack them, but that's how pitchers are going after him. And if you look at, I looked at some data with 2 strikes this season, that's how guys are going at him. And if you're a pitcher, you got to find a way to go at Gunnar Henderson. I mean, look right here. This is his Baseball Savant page. This is incredible. It's red sliders everywhere. He is an incredible talent, but most hitters still have at least one hole, and that's kind of where Gunnar's is right now. And then the last thing really to mention in the what went wrong category is just he did go 0 for 9 in the postseason. You cannot gloss over it. Gunnar Henderson in the 2 games against the Royals, 0 for 9, 4 strikeouts, 2 walks. Now, he was not alone, right? The Orioles scored 1 run total in 2 games. Pretty much everyone, I would say Cedric Mullins was the only player on offense who did anything in that wild card series for the Orioles. And to give Gunnar some credit, he was one of the only hitters who was consistently good in the ALDS last year. He went 6 for 12 with a home run. He hit 500 in his first 3 playoff games back in 2023. So it's not Gunnar Henderson's 0 for 20 in his playoff career. No. He was great 2 years ago and just struggled in a small sample 2 games last year. But with that offense struggling going into the postseason, Gunnar is a guy they felt like they needed to lean on to get them going in some way, and he just did not deliver. And that's something where he's just going to need to deliver a little bit more when hopefully the Orioles get back to October. And to get back to October, they're going to need a big performance from Gunnar Henderson this year. How much bigger can it get, though? And where does he kind of fall in this batting order? We'll talk about that to finish off the show coming up next. So for Gunnar Henderson, he hit 37 home runs. He's a power hitter. He's a hitter to all fields. He's one of the best hitters in baseball. But he also was in the leadoff spot for most of last season. As we move to the biggest storylines for Gunnar Henderson heading into the 2025 season, I think the first one is, does he remain in the leadoff spot for the Orioles? Now, Gunnar Henderson hit leadoff 119 times in 2024. When he wasn't leadoff, he was mostly hitting third or fourth for the Orioles. That was usually against lefties when they would move him down the order a little bit. But when he was in the leadoff spot, he was great. From the number 1 spot in the lineup, Gunnar hit 294, 373, 568, a 167 WRC plus from the leadoff spot this season. Those are incredible numbers. And there are arguments that his 37 home runs that he hit would be better served with more guys on base ahead of him. And I hear that. You would rather hit home runs with guys on than hit home runs with the bases empty. And Gunnar did hit a lot of home runs with the bases empty. 21 of his 37 home runs were solo shots in 2024. And you could argue that if he weren't hitting leadoff, a good chunk of those 21 would have had runners on base. I mean, he hit 12 home runs to lead off a game this season. Now, there's no guaranteeing that if he was hitting second or third, those top two guys would have gotten on base to allow him to hit a homer. There's no guarantee the pitcher would have pitched him the same way if he had already faced two batters and one of them got on base and it was later in the inning or whatever it may be. But he did hit 12 leadoff home runs and 21 solo shots. And the 12, there was never even a chance for it to be anything but a solo homer. And that can be a little aggravating. It's really nice to start a game up 1-0. We absolutely love when Gunnar Henderson does that. But when he hits that, and then maybe Adley Rutschman follows it up with a single and Ryan O'Hearn with a walk, it's like, man, if we had flipped that and Gunnar could have hit third, now you're up 3-0. And it's normal as a fan to think like that when this amazing player is hitting leadoff home runs. It's a big argument that Phillies fans have about Kyle Schwarber, who continues to be a 30 to 40 home run talent and hitting leadoff for them. And he hits a lot of leadoff home runs, and Gunnar Henderson, better player than Kyle Schwarber, obviously, but is in a similar category with hitting leadoff. Now, the flip side of this argument is you should always feel like you're putting your best player in terms of on-base percentage in the leadoff spot because you want to start a game with that guy on base. And remember, you only hit leadoff once. Like, yeah, you could theoretically lead off more innings, but you're only guaranteed to hit leadoff once in a game, and that is to begin the game. So theoretically, in all of his other at-bats, he could have runners on, and the Orioles hope he will have runners on. And if you combine that with the fact that, hey, it's nice to go up 1-0, I still feel pretty good about Gunnar in the leadoff spot. And here's the thing. His on-base percentage of .364 last season, that led the Orioles. Second place was Heston Kjerstad at .351. He didn't play a whole lot last year. Among the guys who actually played a lot and were with the team all season, Ryan O'Hearn's .334 on-base percentage was second best on the team. That's right. Among the regulars, O'Hearn was second, and he was 30 points below Henderson in OBP in 2024. Now, some of that was just a lot of the second half slump. The Orioles were really struggling to get on base, and a lot of those on-base percentages dropped for a lot of players, including Adley Rutschman. I mean, he has always been the O's leader in OBP until his second half slump last year, and the O's are confident that will change. He'll be back to the on-base guy that he usually is. But that's the guy you want leading off. It's okay if he gives you 35-plus home run power. If he's clearing away your best on-base guy and and obviously your best hitter, I'm okay him being in that leadoff spot. Now, I do think eventually Jackson Holliday will be the Orioles leadoff hitter. Now, I would like to know in the comments here on the Locked On Orioles YouTube page, who do you think will lead off, let's say, the majority of games in 2026? Because I feel like this year, it's probably still going to be mostly Gunnar Henderson as they kind of ease Jackson Holliday in. But let's assume Holliday becomes an established big leaguer this year. Does Holliday get that role? Does Henderson still stay in that role in 2026? Is there someone else? Is Enrique Bradfield here to do it as more of a classic leadoff guy? Can Jordan Westburg do it? Can Colton Cowser do it? Does Adley Rutschman get thrown back into that mix? I'm very intrigued to know what you all out there think. So let me know in the comments who you think should lead off. But I think it's going to be Gunnar. Now, again, I think in the future it's going to be Jackson Holliday, but just not this year. I think Adley Rutschman can still do it from time to time. Brandon Hyde does not like him doing it at home. He's already talked about it, how he doesn't like him having to catch the top of the first, then have to get all the gear off and get ready to lead off the bottom of the first when there is the pitch clock that's also in between innings. He said him and Adley have both been uncomfortable with it, which is why he stopped doing it. But I wouldn't mind Adley leading off sometimes on the road, right? Because then you can hit first, and if you get out, you have some time. Even if you're on the bases, you have a different kind of time to put the gear on. But even it felt like Hyde wasn't really willing to do that, because then you might lose a little bit of time of your pitcher warm-up in the bullpen, or it takes a little bit more time for Adley to get out there in the first inning, which is like the most important in-between inning warm-up for your starting pitcher. I don't think Hyde loves doing it. I think he's much more likely to do it on the road. But at home, I don't see him leading off Adley, unless, of course, Adley's DHing. That's something where this could be interesting, because when the Orioles face lefties, they're probably going to, a good amount of the time, DH Adley and have Gary Sanchez catch. And against lefties, that's a place to put Gunnar Henderson maybe lower down in the 3-hole. Could that be a perfect place when you're DHing Adley against a lefty to hit him leadoff and move Gunnar down the order? I think that's definitely a possibility. Still think it's mostly Gunnar's job. It'll be interesting seeing how that goes forward. And then you look at it all and you're just like, can Gunnar Henderson ascend to another level this season? I think it's possible with some improved defense, some of the doing a little better with those fastballs up in the zone. Like the projections, all the projection systems at Fangraphs have him around a 145 WRC plus, a 30 home runs, a 7 WAR season. That would be an amazing year, but that would all be underselling what he did last year. And I think it's honestly underselling what I think he's going to do this year. I think he's going to be much closer to the 150, 160 WRC plus player he was. I think he can push 40 home runs with the wall coming in a bit in left field at Camden Yards. I think he's going to play a little bit better defense, which will allow him to hover around 8+ WAR. And I think he's going to be, once again, a top 5 finisher in AL MVP voting. It's going to be a fun year for Gunnar Henderson. And then I guess the final storyline for him heading into this year is, will the Orioles extend him? I mean, he is the player on this team. He is a free agent after 2028. So the Orioles have 4 more seasons of Gunnar Henderson before he becomes a free agent. That means 4 more years to figure out a way to keep this man in Baltimore. He is a Scott Boras client. He is one of the, I think, 10 best players in baseball. That combination usually means a player is not going to take a contract extension before he hits free agency. Boras and Gunnar are going to want to see if they can go get 5, 6, 700 million 4 years from now. I find it highly unlikely that the Orioles would be able to get an extension done with Gunnar Henderson. I'm sure they'd love to, but he's probably going to want to go to free agency. I mean, I would throw all the David Rubenstein money in the world at Gunnar Henderson to keep him around for 10 more years. But it's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out, because I don't think he's going to accept an extension from anyone, because he's going to want to go hit free agency. And that is why it's so key to make the most out of these next 4 years that you have Gunnar, especially when here in 2025, he's still a fairly cost-controlled star on this team. You got to make the most of it. And Gunnar having another amazing season is a good first step in making the most of it and trying to bring a World Series to Baltimore in 2025. But that'll do it for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. We will be back tomorrow. I know there was a spring training game on Tuesday. It wasn't televised. There was no StatCast. It's cool that Enrique Bradfield Jr. hit a home run. That's about all I got for you. But we do get a StatCast game on Wednesday. The Orioles are at the Pirates in Grapefruit League action, and Tomoyuki Sugano makes his Orioles spring training debut with StatCast. That is right. We will get to see all of the data on Sugano's pitches after that start on Wednesday afternoon. That will certainly be fun to see. I don't think there is a broadcast of the game, but StatCast will be enough. We will talk about it and get to some other Orioles news and notes on a Thursday episode. TBD if the Thursday pod will come out in the morning or the afternoon, but I'll get it to you on Thursday, and then we'll have a Friday show as well. But back Thursday to talk Sugano's first outing. Until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.